In this video, I'll show you the background pseudonyms and perks for Going Medieval version 0.2. These have all changed in recent updates, with passions now being determined by the backgrounds, pseudonyms and perks. So to get a passionate fighter or a passionate farmer, you'll need to wade through huge amounts of choices to find them. In the process of making a new Going Medieval series called Blackness, I've done the wading for you. If you're in a hurry, here are the important backgrounds and pseudonyms. The double star highlighted in green indicates they are passionate about that job. A single star means they're eager. I can also quickly show you my tier list of perks too, which I'll go over later in the video. But if you're already experienced in Going Medieval, you might not need a full breakdown. For newer players, you first need to enable enhanced customization to be able to change backgrounds and perks. In older versions of Going Medieval, you could just add passions to a skill, but they are now linked to the backgrounds, the pseudonyms and the perks. And it's the reason I'm making this guide. Eagerness will increase XP gained by 2.5 times in that skill, and passion will increase it by 4 times. They will also enjoy the task if they are eager or passionate about it, and high happiness can lead to an additional buff called joyful or merry, which further improves work speed and XP gained. So if a character is passionate about farming, they will get better at farming 4 times faster than normal. They'll also enjoy it, which leads them to becoming joyed or merry, which then leads them to getting a boost in work speed and XP gained. Since update 11 called Events and Roles, we now have roles like Bard, Chaplain, Druid, and now the very recently added with update 12, a Prison Warden. After doing the wading, pseudonyms are the only background that currently offers a passion in these new roles, and there's not one for the Prison Warden yet. Also, added with the Events and Roles update was Settler's characteristic to dislike jobs. This is also determined by backgrounds, pseudonyms and perks. 1 star indicates unwilling with a 0.5 XP gain, and the 2 red stars represent resentful, which takes XP gained as low as 0.2 normal XP gain. So for this guide, I assume you want to make effective characters. Here is my consolidated list of the most notable backgrounds and pseudonyms. Some important notes are that there is only one way to get a passionate farmer, which is the botany skill, and that is to make their second background as a farmer. There is a green thumb perk, but it would only give you eagerness, not passion. Also, 2 eagerness do not stack to make a passion, but an eagerness can cancel out an unwillingness. For instance, Mary's dainty perk was cancelled out by the industrious perk, giving her neither a positive nor a negative response to unskilled labour. So remember, they don't stack, but they do interact. Craft and unskilled labour are purple because they're not skills that you can gain XP in, but they are tasks that can be enjoyed or disliked from a mood standpoint. I think the bricklayer is an interesting one to consider because it's referring to stonemasonry and clay brick making. Unskilled labour is stewarding, such as opening windows or fueling torches, and also hauling or priority hauling. Normally pet dogs can be used to do a lot of the hauling once you obtain them, but a person will need to do the stewarding. It also helps to make the steward fast, but we can discuss that in the perk section. So let's conclude the backgrounds and the pseudonyms. You'll notice the skill outcomes, as in the points, are not green or red depending on if the skill is gained or taken. That's because they don't really matter. You can manually adjust the skills if you like, but eagerness, passion, unwilling and resentfulness are the most important factors you need to consider when choosing backgrounds and pseudonyms. As once set, they cannot be changed. That makes the pseudonyms that provide passion or eagerness for roles, highlighted in yellow, very rare. You'll also find passion for mining, tailoring and botany very rare, as they can only be obtained from Reckless background 1, Tanner in background 2 and Farmer from background 2. We'll look at perks soon, but for perks you can only get a passion for marksman, melee and intellect. All other passions must be got here. So this little guide will help you make specialists. If you want the files, you can get them on my Discord, or you could just take a screenshot, as this is the main information that you need here. So here is my completed ranking of all the perks. There are lots of them, and the perks will depend more on how you play. For me, I usually play with a high combat difficulty. You can see that from my previous Going Medieval series. In fact, East Avon had combat difficulty so high that the raids were around 60 to 70 attackers, which caused a lot of issues with frames and just stuttering. That's generally why the East Avon series ended, and also the Events and Roles update scrambled my character's passions. So for me, who leans into the combat element, I consider movement speed very important. Also, marksman is more useful than melee, as you're typically going to be vastly outnumbered during raids. So that all reflects in my tier list, but we'll go through it. So we're going to go through these quite quickly just so we can cover all of them in case you don't know what any of them do. You'll get my opinion on whether you should use them or if you shouldn't. Generally, it's the ones in the S, A and B category that you would want. Obviously, Fs are the ones you want to avoid the most. If it's in C tier, it's neither positive nor negative. So first, we have aesthetic, which is a C tier. It doesn't really have any good or bad effects. So next we have Assure, which is also a C tier, as it doesn't really add or take away very much. They seemingly will get hungry less, but they take longer to eat. Overall, it doesn't really do much. Benevolent is a B tier. It's good, but is it really better than an A tier? Probably not, no. So you want to save your A tier for the ones that you really want. Because I'm more combat orientated, I prefer probably what's coming up next, which is Bloodlust, which for me is an A tier. Since the new updates, Bloodlust now gives you passion in marksman and melee, which is a good way to get those passions if you want to use your backgrounds for something more work related. Previously, Bloodlust would have just gave you a positive mood modifier if you defeated an enemy. Next we have Brawler, which gives unarmed damage plus 30%. Be careful with that because it's only the unarmed damage that's increased. It does give them a preference in melee for eagerness, but it's not that great. So for me, that's a C tier. Next we have Brawny, which is an excellent one. It has 25% movement speed, 25% work speed, 5% on melee damage with a weapon, and 5% unarmed. Excellent all-round S tier. Callus now has a resentful preference for art, which is not terrible, but it's not great either. I'm going to put it in D. So it does have the benefit that bodies don't phase them, but you typically use dogs to move bodies anyway, since dogs were invented. Cannibal does exactly what it says on the tin, but it's not one that I use. It actually does have a positive effect, but no negative effects. So it is positive if they do eat human flesh, but there is actually no negative. Therefore I'm going to put it in C. But if you did use it, you might argue this is a B. But for me, it's a C. I don't really use it. Not in a series yet, anyway. Next we have Chili. They get cold easily. It's not terrible. It's not great. It's a D tier. Churl is a pretty bad one. You have the negative mood, you have the negative social interactions. In themselves, they're not that bad, but when it all gets combined, it's like a pretty miserable settler. Cold Hardy, where they are not affected by the cold. I think that's similar to Snow White, which we'll see later. It's good, but it's not great. It's not worth searching for, but obviously it's useful, and there is no negative. Then we have Congenial, which is a B tier. Obviously, a good mood is good, but it's not great. Contemplative is a pretty bad one. They're going to have a low mood and they're going to socially interact less. I'm going to put an E tier, but you could argue this is more of an F tier. Dainty is now a pretty good one because you get passion for art. You will get a dislike of unskilled labour, but you also get plus 10 art. I would put this in the A tier. It's a pretty good way to get passion for art because perks are easier to come by than backgrounds. Art is also probably the least important skill, especially at the beginning of the game. Next we have Disfigured, which will lower their aesthetic value by 10%. This is normally determined by their clothes and can be counteracted by that, but they also have higher social interaction chance of negative social interactions. For me, it's an E tier. Dullard is a pretty bad one, so they have less XP gain across the board for all skills and they're more clumsy. They'll also have a dislike of doing intellectual tasks and they'll have lower skills in intellect and speech. F tier. Early Bird is a good one. I would put it in B tier because you've got fast sleep recovery, but you actually have a faster sleep depletion rate, so they get tired faster. Elf Shot, I think, is pretty bad because this motor function affects many areas in work and combat, so I would put it in the E tier. So they'll be slower at fighting in melee, slower at fighting with archery, and they'll be slower at most jobs. So Erudite, I think some people could argue this is the best one in the game. I like the movement speed, but this is definitely S tier. You've got a 30% gain in XP for everything, and you've got passion for intellect as well. Huge. Fair is a very good one, but I would only put in the A tier because Ravishing would take the S tier. Fair gives you a 20% increase in bargains, which means you'll barter better. It'll also give you the aesthetic value and positive social interactions. Overall, it's very good, but A tier, not quite S tier. Fleet-footed for me is an S tier because you're getting 20% movement speed and 15% motor function. It's just good overall. I noticed that spelling mistake there, but I'm just going to leave it in. S tier. 40 winks is good because there's no negative here, so you're just getting the positives. You're getting faster sleep and slower tiredness, so during the day when you're working you get tired slower. That's an A tier for me. So next we're going to have a bunch of eating ones. So first is gluttonous. So this increases their appetite, but it decreases the time it takes them to eat. So they eat fast, but the eating fast, as I'm going to go over repeatedly, is not very useful. The appetite is a bit of a problem though, because the more they need to eat, the more they need to run back to pick up the food to eat it. The time it takes them to pick up the food is sometimes more the problem than, saving time by eating. So I would definitely put this in a D. And for the next ones, Gobbler and Gourmet and things, also, they're going to kind of be sitting on C. There's no real advantage to having a faster consumption duration. So eating faster doesn't really have an advantage. What does have an advantage, possibly in my opinion, is Green Thumb, which I'm going to put in S tier, and that's because it's quite hard to find people with an eagerness or passion in botany, and this gives you eagerness. You do sacrifice interest in art, but that's not important to me. The harvest amount is increased by 35%, and also there's less chance to fail. This is very useful because it's quite hard to have designated farmers now, unless you give them a farmer background. Heat resistance is B tier for me. It doesn't have a lot of advantages, but obviously it has no negative. It is a gain, but it's just not very useful. Hedonist means that they drink more, which is probably a positive, but it depends how you look at it. They'll use more of your alcohol, but they'll be in a good mood if they drink alcohol. I'm going to put it in C tier. Hefty, I would say, is actually a good one. Even though you've got the movement speed penalty, you've actually got a 20% increase on damage with a weapon, and a 25% increase speed at mining, which is pretty good if you're willing to sacrifice the movement speed. You could make a specialist melee using this perk. It's an A tier for me, but it does conflict with Whirlwind and Fleet-footed, but you can still use things like Robust and others to make a specialist melee. Hot-blooded is a D, it's a negative, but it's not a big problem. I'm going to put Ill-favoured as an E, it's pretty much the same as Disfigured. Industrious for me is an A because it's got a global work speed of plus 15% and you get a preference for unskilled labour. Overall I think that's pretty good. Infirm on the other hand is definitely an F. You've got slow hit point recovery and you've got less motor function. That's an F tier for me. Iron Stomach is pretty much similar to Gobbler. Again, I would just put it in a C. I don't think it's very useful, but it's not negative. After that is Laggardly, which is really bad. So you've got a lot of movement speed loss and 30% global work speed loss. It's one of the worst, surely. F tier, of course. Lightweight, I'm going to put as an E tier. It's pretty bad. The reason is they'll pass out when they're drunk, but then somebody has to come rescue them when they do that as well. So it kind of prevents them from doing work, it prevents someone else from doing work. Listless is not that bad. I would put it in a D. It's just a small negative to social interaction. Lord of Misrule is something I'm going to put in the C tier, but you could easily put this in B tier. It's just a case of, I don't think the social side is that important. Moribund goes straight to F tier. You've got hit point recovery issues, terrible motor function issue, and wound regeneration problems. That's F tier. Night Owl is an A tier. It's similar to 40 Winks. I think it's actually slightly better. So you sleep faster and you get tired slower. Outgoing is one of the more strong positive social ones, but I'm going to still put it just in B tier because I don't think it's that important compared to, work speed, movement speed, fighting capability, skill preferences. It's a B tier for me. For me, Precious is an F tier as this unskilled labour, melee and marksman, so disliking all these jobs is pretty much a huge problem in any community. Punch Drunk, I would say, is just a D tier. Obviously you don't want it, but it's not that big a problem. It might even increase their melee skill by doing this, but you definitely don't want to pair this one with Brawler. Ravishing is easily an S tier. You get a bargain plus 30% when you barter. You also get the aesthetic value plus 20, positive social interactions, and you get a little bit of speech. Very good all round. Next is Robust, which again is an S tier for me, so you get faster recovery speeds, and you get 25% increased motor function, which I think is very good. Ruthless, I'm surprisingly going to put as a B tier because you get the 20% bargain. Obviously you get the negative social, but those aren't too effective. I would say you don't really want to choose this as a perk, but if you find a character who has this skill, then you might want to take them. So in the new update, you'll be able to potentially recruit prisoners. So if one of them had Ruthless and you didn't have someone who was good at bartering, you might actually want this skill, and it might help you in deciding who you want to recruit and who you don't want to. I'll be going over stuff like this in the new series, Blackness. Sluggardly, as you can imagine, is a F tier for me. You've got 15% reduced movement speed, 20% reduced global work speed. Terrible, F tier. Snow White, I think, is similar to Cold Hardy. They enjoy the cold or whatever. It's a B tier, obviously a positive, but it's not that useful. Somnolent, I'm actually going to put in a D tier because they do have faster sleep recovery speeds, but they just get tired faster when they're awake. They sleep more often, but they get good sleep. They're like a sloth. Stout goes straight to F tier. They've got the increased appetite and less movement speed. Terrible. Now they're going to be going back to get something to eat all the time, and they're going to be slow when they do it. Strapping, I would put that as a B tier because they get the preference for unskilled labour, which is good, I think. Most communities need quite a lot of unskilled labour. Sunseeker is also a B tier. They enjoy the sun, same as Cold Hardy, Snow White, but just with warm weather. Swigger is also a B tier because they work faster when they're drunk, which is pretty good. Vigorous, even though it looks like there's movement speed, there isn't. It's just hit point recovery and wound regeneration, so it's a B tier for me. Vulnerable is an E tier, so you have longer wound regeneration and a slight decrease in motor function. Pretty bad. Washout is a D tier. They don't like getting wet, it's not a huge problem. Next we have Whirlwind, which for me, clearly, is an S tier. You've got 30% movement speed and 10% motor function. Very good. I don't know how to pronounce this one, Wiki I think. This one I would actually put as an A tier because you've got an increased chance to tame an animal and an increased chance to tame them. Now the main thing about this is that taming a bear, if that's what you wanted to do, is very hard. This might help with that. I haven't tested it myself, but that 10% increase can make a big difference. It normally takes a level 30 skill to even attempt to train a bear. So to have this extra little bit of chance is pretty solid. I've never actually successfully trained a bear yet, even though I've tried quite a few times. The next one is Winesome, which is a good one. I would give it a B because it's kind of like a lesser version of Fair or Ravishing. The thing about this one is don't confuse it with Winesome the background. Winesome the background is mostly negative. It's not one that you want, but as a perk, Winesome is good. And last but not least is Wise. This one's a good one. I would give it an A tier. It's not as good as Erudite. You get a 20% XP gain and you get some intellect. So if you had to pick, you would want Erudite, but this one is pretty solid. So that's my tier list of all the perks in Going Medieval for version 0.2. I've no doubt that the developer plans to add more backgrounds, pseudonyms and perks in the future, but for now this is a fairly up-to-date guide. If you would like PDF copies of the backgrounds and perks, you can find them on my Discord.